In a distant age, when the maps of the world were redrawn by the blood of men and the words of sages, a man appeared whose origins were not fully known. They called him the Black Sorcerer because the shadows of his feet preceded his steps, and because his eyes gleamed like coal when he enforced his silence. His name was not spoken easily in gatherings. He spoke little, and his voice reminded people that sometimes music lives in a long silence. He first appeared on the margins of small wars between remote principalities, clad in a dark cloak that wrapped around him as if the night itself had donned his coat. His hair was black as carbon, and on his right hand there was a tattoo blurred beyond recognition, perhaps the mark of a pact made with something older than humans. At first, he did not seek to be a leader or a king. His first pursuit was knowledge, an appetite for knowing that drove him to tread the farthest reaches of forgotten libraries and to stamp on manuscripts that had become ash to those who never finished reading them. Over the years, the occult sciences drew him like iron draws fire. He did not seek magic for power's sake, but to make time unravel before his eyes so that the words of history could be rewritten. His vision was simple on the surface, a world ordered anew, less deceitful, sometimes harsher and sometimes fairer, all according to strict calculations in a rational mind that sometimes rose above mercy. As time passed, his knowledge deepened and his ties with unseen forces strengthened. He learned how to borrow small bundles of power from eternity, how to whisper words that made the laws of nature contort and bow. Like every mastered power, it fed his pride. At first, he did not realize that altering small courses would cause countless ripples, that the waterfalls of cause and effect do not bend only where a sorcerer wills, but spread to consume trees that were never in his intent. The real turning point came when he met the old judge in a Midland city, the judge entrusted by the country to preserve a fragile balance. The judge, an elderly man who carried the memory of the Constitution on his lips, heard of the sorcerer and asked to meet him not to debate, but to test his values. They sat beneath a stone dome, and the discussion soon became an ethical trial. The judge said slowly, "Do you love people, or do you treat them well because you spare yourself the loneliness?" The sorcerer was silent, then answered calmly, "I love truth more than I love humans." That reply was not merely a word, but a crack in the judge's receptivity. Doubt appeared in the judge's eyes. Yet the disagreement did not end there. The judge became convinced that the sorcerer held potential for radical reform, and he extended his hand toward a fragile alliance, a cunning intellect allied with legal authority. When the sorcerer gained a foothold in the capital, he began to implement his vision. He did not build an army or erect statues. He began rewriting old contracts and laws with a touch invisible to citizens until their lives changed without warning. His first measure was abolishing a corrupt tax system that tied bread to spoils. Overnight, tax payments changed and wealth flowed to farms long abandoned. The poor celebrated in the morning for the first time in decades, and the sorcerer saw in their eyes an innocence as if the world might become better. But the price of that apparent correction surfaced quickly. Nobles who had secretly drained the treasuries moved by night, and new gangs formed around the palace court. Here, the first chain of consequences began. The change that eased some suffering tightened others' throats, and the balance that had been fragile before became even more precarious after the people partially unshackled themselves. It was no longer mere legal experimentation, it became a determination to steer the courses of history. He used magic to nullify ancient treaties by revealing buried secrets in brittle papers, making their letters fade in a light seen only by those who held his key. With such moves, he made states collapse silently and produced new cycles of influence on a map that had not expected to be drawn by pens not human. As his power grew, he found himself surrounded by shadowy allies. a woman called Layla the Cunning with a terrifying political mind, a former knight commander turned defeated agent driven by greed, and a group of scholars who helped him cloak his deeds in legal robes. Opposing voices rose as well. A hermit in a distant monastery declared that the sorcerer's tampering with the joints of existence obscured the creator's will, and marginalized villagers saw in his decisions an assault on customs that remained their life's perspective. The greatest confrontation was not with an army or a judge, but with an internal struggle. Each time he used his powers to correct a darkness he perceived, a crowd of shadows slipped behind him, and his ideal dream became one of the causes of his spiritual collapse. Before that, a scene marked a grave turning. An official from an ancient city warned the sorcerer that diverting small channels of a river would cause famine in a distant valley. The sorcerer reviewed his maps like a physician reviews a prescription, but he judged that the cost of refraining would remain like other judgments. Many people would revert to justifying injustice. He raised his hand and breathed ancient words stored on the shelves of his memory. The soil trembled, and the river changed course to another mouth. In the new city, they celebrated harvests, but in the old valley, the fields withered, sheep died, and people who had done nothing suffered bleeding losses. When the sorcerer learned of this, his feelings were not pure. He felt neither joy nor full remorse. His emotions were scattered like stolen encyclopedias. He had moments of deep anger, short fits of crying in the corridors of his palace that he never wove into a tale for anyone, and perhaps no one ever saw those moments. In a later battle, a group of rebels tried to assassinate him. Many allies adopted the idea that killing the sorcerer would restore balance. They besieged him in a palace atop a plateau and attacked with swords and fire. But the sorcerer did not defend himself with physical force. He summoned moral powers of another kind. He did not kill his opponents, but made them see images of their worst pasts, memories they could not forget that became an engine to restore their sense of shame. Some dismounted willingly, some fled in haste, but the scene revealed another truth. Magic, however exalted, cannot erase seeds planted in human hearts. As disputes increased, history began to tell new tales about the sorcerer. In markets, children whispered names born of ignorance and fear. Books were printed about a new heritage attributed to him, and history teachers asked students to decide, was he a benefactor or a destroyer? Those who lived under his direct rule carried contradictory stories. A woman said, "He saved my children from a looming hunger," while a neighbor said, "He took from me a field I had not finished building." Each story carried a shadow chasing the big question: did he make history or merely respond to a great wave that was coming? Events accelerated when the sorcerer decided to run a larger experiment, to upturn the course of an entire state without widespread gunfire, but by radically altering collective memory. He used ancient rites to make slight edits in people's records, causing some documents to be lived as if they had never happened, and rewriting the stories of heroes once taken as symbols. Elites who had built their glory on those myths suddenly found themselves without monuments, and conflict flared in arenas that had never before burned. On the night later called the Night of the Mask, people marched demanding truth. They didn't fully know what they wanted, but they felt something had been lost. Then older forces intervened. For the first time, the sorcerer faced an entity from a non-human realm, an element of the rites that had never been subservient. It appeared in a collective dream like a gust scattering pages of history, and spoke in a voice heard only by open hearts. Change without respect for the whole's order creates a void that even your powers cannot fill. The sorcerer awoke from the dream disturbed. He did not believe in limits to his knowledge, but he began to sense cosmic laws beyond his calculations. This realization was followed by one of his harshest tests. The world began to suffer irregular tears, phenomena his books had not mentioned.
birds cut the sky in strange ways, lunar arcs failed to arrive on time, and a strange disease struck distant, isolated stations. The sorcerer realized that altering history's course did not concern humans alone, but unsettled a larger web of relations among beings, places, and memory. From here, his inner rift became clear. He could continue imposing his vision, become a god who closed the doors of dissent forever, but the price would be erasing an entire world of meaning. A decisive moment arrived when he reached his final choice: either continue and create an ordered world at the cost of the lives and places that were not inert, or relinquish part of his power to restore balance, thereby risking losing all the influence and status he had built. On the night he decided, he went to an old library where his earliest manuscripts lay, where it all began. He sat on